Welcome, this is Subin Cho, a project consultant of the Preparatory Office for the Interpretation and Presentation of World Heritage Sites, New UNESCO 2 Centre, International Centre. Pleasure to meet you all at the 2021 online lecture series on Understanding Multi-World Heritage Interpretation and Presentation. Highly appreciate you all for joining today's lecture. Starting from last month, 7 lectures and 1 special discussion under the theme Presentation Delivering Multiple Values of World Heritage are prepared in 2021 online lecture series, once a month until November 2021. Last month, Professor Maria Santana had our opening lecture Introduction to World Heritage Presentation. Today, President of ICOM, Alberto Galandini, will have a lecture on ICOM Museums, Heritage Sites, Cultural Landscapes, a Strategic Relation. In June, Professor Maria Gregory Burbis will have a lecture on World Heritage and Tourism. Following that, a lecture on digital technology by Professor Hafizur Rahman will be held in July. And regarding the 5th lecture in August, we are still having a talk about the schedule and the title of it, so we will upload the list of our lecturers with the exact title and schedule later on our Facebook page. And in September, Dr. Sarah Court will have a lecture on community engagement in interpreting World Heritage Sites. And the lecture Heritage and Participatory Media in the Age of Data Technology by Professor Elisa Giaccardi will be held in October. In November, there will be a special discussion between our first lecturers of the 2020 and 2021 online lecture series. Professor Neil Silberman and Professor Maria Santana will discuss more inclusive and participatory World Heritage interpretation and presentation. Further information on the upcoming lectures and the Centre's latest news will be delivered through our Facebook page and Instagram. If you are joining the lecture on YouTube, you can find the link for the Facebook page and Instagram on the live streaming video's description. Well, as you might have noticed from the titles of the lectures, Heritage interpretation and presentation have a strong interaction with various fields. In the 2021 WIPIC online lecture series, our lecturers will have lectures on the significance of the inclusive and participatory World Heritage presentation with those fields, so don't forget to join our monthly lectures. And most importantly, what leads World Heritage interpretation and presentation into a more communicative, inclusive, and sustainable one is our participants' active cooperation. So please come join the lectures and leave your opinions and questions about the lectures and World Heritage issues on our YouTube or Facebook's live streaming videos. On the online lecture series, we have time for questions after having the lectures. Now, before we start today's lecture, I'd like to introduce our lecturer, Alberto Galandini. Alberto Galandini is president of ICOM and former chair of ICOM Italy. He is president of Scientific Committee of Trento's Museo delle Scienze, President of Abbonamento Musei Association of Aosta Valley, Lombardy and Piedmont, member of the Board of Directors of the National Museum of Bellagio Ducale in Mantua, and of the Scientific Committee of Brescia Museo Foundation. Also, he was a speaker at the UNESCO High-Level Forum of Museums, Shenzhen, China, and at the high-level panel on the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO 1970 Convention. He delivers lectures at universities and international conferences and has been widely published in Italian, English, French, and Spanish. Now, let's start today's lecture. A great pleasure to meet you, President Alberto Gandini.
Lecture, but let's decipher the title. What is my lecture about? 5 themes, let's say so. 1, I will talk about ICOM, Mission, Global Network, and Museum definition. 2, I will talk about the social and territorial role of museums, museums in the contemporary age and in the global change. Then we talk about ICOM and museums against illicit trafficking of cultural property, for museum and heritage for local development, museums and heritage for the United Nations Global Goals for Sustainable Development. So let's start from the first part. Let me say a few words about ICOM and ICOM's mission. Well, ICOM was founded in November 1946 by few enlightened museum directors from 15 nations. It was founded during the first UNESCO conference. These few directors, our founding fathers, faced the disaster, the ruins of World War II, and they strongly thought that museums, culture, cultural institution, heritage is indispensable to build up a peaceful and prosperous world. But let me tell you that ICOM had a predecessor. In 1926, the International Office of Museums was founded. 1926. It was an office of the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations. And it was very active for at least 10 years. OIM, the International Office of Museums, organized a very important conference in Paris, very important conference on museum. It's an important role in the history of museology and museography. But, well, going next to the World War II, the League of Nations entered in a big crisis, and also the OIM entered in a big crisis. It was closed officially in 1946, but as a matter of fact, in the last year, of course, of the world, nothing worked. Well, but it's very important because the history of museum, the history of museology is a long, long, long continuous history. So we have this important predecessor. At the beginning, ICOM, the International Council of Museums, was a very small association with few people. The first conferences were 100 people from all over the world. But now the scenario is completely changed. Now ICOM is a non-governmental association made up of 49,000 professionals, a museum from 138 countries. Well, what's the mission of ICOM? Well, to be short, I just read what is written, because it's very clear, what is written in the statutes of ICOM. ICOM is an international organization of museums and museum professionals. That's important. We are an organization of museum institution and museum professional, single persons. So our members are museums and people, friends, colleagues, which is committed to the research, conservation, continuation, and communication to society of the world's natural and cultural heritage, present and future, tangible, intangible. It's very clear. I think that I will come back to some of these issues during my lecture. Well, I told you in the beginning, ICOM was very small. Now, I told you we have 49,000 members. But what is important, ICOM comprises 174 national and international committees, regional alliances, affiliated organizations. Well, of course, what a national committee is very clear. We have national committees in around 120 countries, but we are present in 140 countries. We have international committees dealing with different issues related to museum. It could be related to the typology of the collection. We have international committees on fine arts museums, on ethnographic museum, on history museums, on historical museum, and so on and so on and so. But also, we have this around this among these 32 committees, international committees. We have also committees with transversal issues dealing with education, dealing with museology, dealing with conservation, dealing with exhibition exchange, and so on and so and so. The regional alliances, of course, are association of different national committees, and the affiliated organization. We have more than 20 affiliated organizations, autonomous organization, museum organizations. They decided to join ICOM, of course, keeping their own autonomy, such as the Open Air Association of the Open Air Museums, of the Children Museums, of the Commonwealth Museum, and so on and so on. Well, but how does ICOM implement its mission? Well, of course, let's start saying a few words about, we have so many conferences all around the world. In a normal year, we have more than 300 conferences all over the world, as you can see in this slide. But now with COVID and everything is online, so we have hundreds and hundreds and thousands, we say, of meetings online. The most important meeting we have is the ICOM Triennial General Conferences, and the last one was in Kyoto in 2019, and convened 4,700 professional museum heritage professionals from all over the world. Before of that, in 2016, we have a conference. The Triennial Conference was in Milan. In 2013 was in Rio de Janeiro. In 2010 was in Shanghai. And the next one will be in Prague. Well, just let me say a few words about the ICOM International Museum Day. ICOM, it's an important initiative of ICOM, of course. ICOM established the International Museum Day in 1977 to increase public awareness of the role of museums. And in the week of the 18th May, museum plan creative events, activities related to the International Museum Day theme. Of course, now it's everything, this year and last year everything was online, and we had, well, so many millions users on social media organizing events and so on about the International Museum Day. The theme of this year is the future of museum, recover and reimagine. Of course, ICOM set standards, professional standards, social standards. And let me cite a very important document approved by UNESCO and drafted with ICOM. It's the UNESCO 2015 recommendation on the protection and promotion of museums and their collection. This is a very important document. It expresses very clearly what museums are, what museums want to be in society. And I really think that this is our, maybe you can think, this is the recommendation. May I suggest you, if you are a professional, heritage professional, museum professional, this is something, a book that you should keep it on your desk, because I think it's an important reference. And of course, the UNESCO recommendation stated that the Code of Ethics for Museum, the ICOM Code of Ethics for Museum, and Professional Standard are shared international references and ask member states to integrate the recommendation. So the ICOM Code of Ethics, ICOM Professional Standards, and so on, in their legislation and policies. And this is very important because this recommendation was approved by 193 states all over the world. So it's an important political, not only technical, cultural document. It's also a very important political document highlighting the role of museums. Well, let me say a few words about the ICOM's Code of Ethics for Museum. This is the most important document of ICOM. It's an identity document for ICOM. What is the ICOM Code of Ethics? It's a document that sets out principles accepted by the international museum and heritage community, as well as minimum standards of conduct and performance to which professionals should conform. It consists of 8 principles arranged in guidelines for desirable professional practice for the management of heritage. Well, of course, like the other document, this is another document that I suggest you to keep it at hand because it's an important reference. Of course, you can download it from our sites and from many other sites. One, I don't go in detail, I just say that it deals with protection and promotion of cultural heritage, about the managing of collections, about the public role of museum, about access to culture, display of museums, collaboration with the community of origin of the collection, professional conduct, and so on. So it's a great, important reference. And it was adopted in 1986, updated 2007, translated in so many languages all over the world. Well, when I talk about it, everybody asks me, well, dear Alberto, I understand that this is an important document, but what is the effective role of the ICOM Code of Ethics? Well, dear friends, I have to tell you that this is not an academic document produced for the university, for the students, but is a document for the world, first of all. So I have to tell you that the respect of the code, the ICOM code, is a binding commitment for ICOM members. The only reason why you may be refused the access to the membership of ICOM if you don't respect the ICOM Code of Ethics. And we'll see in my lecture the issues that, what does it mean, what that means. But it's not only a binding reference commitment for ICOM members. The code is a soft law. I don't know, maybe between you that are not expert in legislation affairs, legislation studies. However, I may say that to you that a soft law is a provision which does not have any legal force, but sets standards of conduct recognized not only by ICOM members, and the museum community, the heritage community, but also by a great number of public and private bodies. Yes, the ICOM code is a soft law. And in some countries, depending on the setting of the framework of the laws, it's even accepted in tribunal as a reference in tribunals. But, and this is the third aspect I want to highlight to you about the importance of the ICOM code, the implementation of UNESCO recommendation, the other document, I suggested you to keep it on your desk, will enhance the legal impact of the code. Nowadays, in many countries, such as Italy, but many others, the code has a legal prescriptive force. What does it mean? It means that the respect of the Code of Ethics is a legal commitment. The law says you have to respect the ICOM code if you want to manage the heritage. So you understand that this is not a document, just a book in your personal library, but it's something more. Well, I just let me say a few words also on the museum definition. What is a museum? What is a museum for ICOM? It's a complicated issue. Of course, you may know that now we are going to update our museum definition. The museum definition is part of the ICOM Code of Ethics, of course. It's part of the recommendation, UNESCO recommendation. It's part of so many laws, national laws all over the world. Well, I just want to give you an idea. I just highlight some keywords because they are related also to heritage sites. Museums are not-for-profit institutions. They are permanent institutions. They are the service of society and its sustainable development. They are open to the public. They acquire, conserve, research, communicate, and exhibit the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity's environment. And their purposes are education, study, and enjoyment. They are, of course, this is a common ground for the museums all over the world. And each museum interprets this definition and try to recognize itself in some part of the definition. But what is interesting is that for ICOM, aside from institutions designated as museums, many other institutions qualify as museums. As you see, this is, by the way, on the slide you have a photo of a World Heritage Site in Italy, an archaeological site in Sicily. Qualify for ICOM as museum also natural, archaeological, and ethnographic monuments and sites, historical monuments and sites, but also natural reserve. So you see that that's the first message. The boundary, the difference between museums and heritage sites, of course they are different, but we have 104,000 museums all over the world. Each museum is diverse. There are not two similar museums in the world. They are all different. And if there are two equal museums, one of the two is not necessary. So diversity is the real keyword. So, but in our great family, heritage sites are for sure part of the family. And the standard, the references, ethical, social, scientific, technological, are for us the same. That's part of life. That's part of reality. Museums all over the world are part of the sites, give informative access to the sites, to the heritage sites, support quite often the visit to the sites. This is Matera Sassi, one of the heritage sites in Italy. There are many museums inside the sites. The museums quite often, almost always conserve and exhibit historical materials from heritage sites. For sure, museum enhance our interpretation sites of the heritage sites. They interpret, help people to understand the meaning, the history, the relation with the reality of the heritage sites. I may say for sure the 55 Italian World Heritage Sites are museums. But by the way, Italy is a great open-air museum, like many other countries. You cannot understand museums without understand the sites, the heritage sites, the historical cities, the historical town, the historical territory they are part of. Second part of my, let's go on, of my lecture, change. Museums are changing, but the world is changing. We are part of global change. Of course, ICOM is reflecting, debating, discussing on the impact of museums, of the incredible challenges that our changing societies are facing: inequality and racism, migration and inclusion, diversity and decolonization, urban regeneration, digital revolution, climate change, and now, unfortunately, pandemics. Well, museums are changing. Well, first of all, let me give you maybe the more visible aspect. The number of museums has boomed in quite a few number of years. Now, I told you already that the last estimation talk about 104,000 museums all over the world, but they are much more, in my personal opinion. We don't have statistics, but we have estimation, very well-grounded estimation. This boom of museums happened before, at first in Western countries, in the Western world, where around 3/4 of museums were established after World War II. In Italy, the 84% of the 5,000 museums were founded after 1960. So you see, very recent, even in an historical country as Italy, but it's the same all over the world. But now, of course, this trend has moved to the urbanizing and developing countries. Well, let me cite an example, a remarkable example, China. In 10 years, the registered museums in China increased from 2,097 museums to almost 5,000 museums, with an increase of hundreds of museums per year. But that's the same all over the to the developing countries. It's the same. But in China, we are talking about great museums. This is a museum, the City Museum of Luoyang, one of the 4 capitals of China. And there are huge museums. There are many more that are not registered. But that's something to give you the message that the number is going up and up. But what changed most, and it's what I would like to emphasize to you, is the social role of museums. It has increased a lot, it's changed incredibly the social role of museums. In 2019, I highlight to you the 2019 conference in Kyoto. The theme was Museum as Cultural Hubs. Yes, museums are places of conservation, exhibition, and education, of course, as much as hubs of participation, of intercultural dialogue, of social inclusion. That means that museums' core functions, acquisition, preservation, research, communication, education, have expanded incredibly. And museums have become more and more social and economic assets, as UNESCO recommendation says very well. We talk about the extended role of museums. Again, the distinction between museum and heritage sites, it's debatable. In 2016, in Milan, we discussed museum and cultural landscapes, the relationship between museum and cultural landscapes. And why? Because museums deal with the collection, of course, they are collection, tangible and intangible, but also with the tangible and intangible heritage conserved outside their walls, as well as with the landscapes that surround them. At the end of the Milan conference, we approved an important resolution. Resolution number 1, responsibility of museum towards landscape. Let me just quote from the resolution, because it's very clear. Museums should extend their mission from a legal and operational point of view. That means it's a question of mission and it's a question of activities. Expand and manage buildings and sites of cultural landscape as extended museums, offering protection and accessibility to such heritage in close relationship with communities. Here you can see another heritage site in Italy, the Cinque Terre. It's a natural and historical heritage site. Well, we are well aware that museum collections cannot be interpreted without considering the cultural landscapes, the heritage sites they are part of, And landscape and heritage sites cannot be valued without the help of museum collections. But museums, heritage sites, and landscapes are made up of relations between places and spaces, between objects and people. It's the same, it's a great interdisciplinary approach. Great interdisciplinary approach. Culture has no boundaries. It's all a great treasure for the communities. And talking about social role, talking about extended museums, I have to say that museums, of course, are in the contemporary age, live in the contemporary age, share all the issues, the problems, the question, the dramas of our contemporary age, deal with the crucial issues of our times. Museums are places for critical thought, for pluralistic views, because they are ethical institutions. We have strong ethical values, respect of diversity, respect of democracy, respect of participation, promotion of participation, free exchange of ideas, fight against any kind of discriminations. And so just let me quote, I have not many, 3 or 4 slides about some of the issues that museum, contemporary issues, that museum dealing now with. First of all, museum and the indigenous heritage. Well, let me quote from the ICOM Code of Ethics. Museums work in close collaboration with the communities from which their collections originate. That's very important, very important. Now, in a multivalent world, we know that the ownership of museum collections is disputed, is challenged. And museums' collection, the ownership of their content has to be shared with the community of origin of their collections. Well, of course, the ownership is disputed at least in 3 cases. One, a part of a collection, some items were illegally acquired or stolen. 2, consist of human remains. 3, when they are part of, they are a national treasure, they are sacred to the source community's culture. And this is a big issue for every museums, but mainly for the universal museums, the so-called universal museums. And so the voluntary return and repatriation to source communities of part of the collection is now a contemporary issue. Well, we're talking about restitution. First of all, no way when a piece of work is a work of art, any kind of cultural heritage is illegally acquired, it should be immediately restituted. No discussion about it. Just let me quote an experience I had just before COVID. I went to Nepal for a series of conferences, and I visited this wonderful museum, Patan Museums. It's a royal palace just next to Kathmandu. And visiting this wonderful museum, in a room, I saw this wonderful stone relief, and there was an information panel saying that this stone relief was stolen in 1982 from a shrine in Nepal and was sold in 1985 by a German art dealer to the Museum für Indische Kunst in Berlin. In 1989, Professor Singh Bangdel, I want to cite his name, quote his name here, Royal Nepal Academy, published an important book, Stolen Images of Nepal. And in 2000, he could identify this object in a museum catalog. Very important. Discussion, no discussion. In the end, the stolen item was returned to Nepal and is now displayed, as I saw it, in Patan museums. That's a best example and is what all the museums in the world do and what should be done. And I will say a few words about the fight against illicit traffic. Everyone should do. But then we have another hot issue, the restitution of human remains. Again, the ICOM Code of Ethics. Human remains are sensitive materials that should be conserved and exhibited if necessary, only if necessary, with respect and sensitivity, and taking into account the beliefs of communities of origin. Maximum respect, they are human bodies. We have to respect them, and we have to respect the communities this person were part of. And by the way, human remains are more and more restituted to the communities of origin. You may see that, you may see in this slide, this friend, a leader of a Sri Lankan Vedda tribe who went to United Kingdom in Scotland and at the Edinburgh University, where he was restituted a set of 9 200-year-old human skulls that were taken from Sri Lanka 1 century ago. That's another excellent example. But then we are talking about the indigenous heritage, decolonizing the museums. Again, dear friends, the ICOM Code of Ethics. Museums should promote the sharing of knowledge, documentation, and collections with museums and cultural organizations in the countries and communities of origin. Museums should be prepared to initiate dialogue for the return of cultural property to a country or people of origin. That's a principle for ICOM. Now it's much discussed, of course. You may know about the Savoie report in France about the restitution of culture, African cultural heritage, and toward a new relational ethics. I cannot deal with these issues now, but I want just to give you a message. I went to Canada. Before pandemics, and I have the great honor to visit important museum who restituted a lot of their collection to the Indian community. And I met a leader, an enlightened leader of this, a colleague, and talking about this restitution, he said a sentence that I want to cite here, to quote here. The repatriation of sacred heritage plundered by colonial powers is a part of the healing and reconciliation process. It's part of the great process of reconciliation and healing, of course. And I take a picture of this, the sentence you saw at the bottom of my slide is a picture from a wonderful exhibition I visited in Canada, in Ontario, and it was dedicated to the indigenous, the Indian heritage, and says, it was on the wall, this is only one small step on the long road to reconciliation. This is the message that ICOM, the museums, and I want to transfer to you. Canada, the Canadian museums I visited, they are doing a wonderful job. They have not only returned collections to the Indians, Six Nations, which are in Canada, but also to American, United States of America Indians communities, which are in another country. You may imagine the terrible problem about transferring a cultural heritage piece from one country to another. But they did it, and that's something we have to reflect and follow the example. Then I was talking about the illicit trafficking of cultural property. That's very important, a major issue, a major issue. Now, I have to tell you that during pandemics, even the looting, the illicit excavation in archaeological sites, especially in the Middle East, but in other parts of the world, has increased dramatically. And we know that the illicit trafficking of cultural heritage is one of the major international international crimes, together with the traffic of human beings and of course the traffic of drugs. Well, let me say that I have to cite an important resolution of the Security Council of the United Nations. In 2017, the United Nations Security Council condemned destruction of cultural heritage, illegal excavation, looting and smuggling of cultural property as crimes against human rights. And it affirmed that those actions are war crimes and that perpetrators of such attacks must be brought to justice. This is the first time the Security Council of United Nations affirmed this. It is very important. It's a sign of the change that the times are changing. Times are changing. It's very important. And for the first time, the resolution affirmed that the mandate of United Nations peacekeeping operation may encompass the protection of heritage. Before of 2017 was not possible. It was not in part of the mission. And so, again, just a few words. In 2016, the International Criminal Court in The Hague sentenced Al Mahdi, this person, for 29 years imprisonment for intentionally destroying cultural, religious, and historical monuments, the mausoleums in Timbuktu in Mali. And it was a very quick process, luckily. But I want to, again, to highlight to you, Al Mahdi's prosecution was the first to focus solely on cultural destruction as war crime. It's very important. Times are changing, fortunately. And again, the Icon Code of Ethics. What museums should do, must do, and are doing. No specimen should be acquired by museums unless a valid title is held. Evidence of lawful ownership in a country is not necessarily a valid title, and the due diligence should establish the full history of each item. It's not important, it's not enough that in the country when it is acquired, it is legally acquired. It should be legally acquired in the country of origin and in the go-between countries. This is what is a due diligence. You have to check everything. And if it's illegally acquired in a part of his life, it should be restituted, cannot be acquired. For museum, acquisitions means not only purchase, but also gift. A museum cannot accept as a gift, as a loan, as a bequest, have an exchange, any item that has been illegally obtained or exported from its countries. And of course, that opened the big issues that I'm not talking about the documentation of museums and the documentation of cultural, heritage sites. Well, a few words about one of the important ICOM tools, the ICOM Red List of cultural objects at risk. The red lists are not lists of stolen objects, that are different kind of tools, but record of endangered categories of cultural property that, one, come from regions that are victim of theft and looting. Two, categories of cultural property that are protected by legislation. Three, that are in demand on the art and antiquities market. And let me remind you that now the market is also online. The police forces told me that in the world, more than 35% of the seizure of illegally acquire cultural heritage happen online, happen on internet. Of course, the red lists are transmitted to police and custom officer, museum, auction houses, and art dealers. They has to know that these categories are endangered, so they have to make a due diligence before selling them. And of course, custom officers are not expert in art or in ethnography or in cultural issues, so they can see that from the red list that some cultural heritage that are being imported are sensitive issues, so they have to be checked. We have produced 17 red lists concerning 36 countries. The last are from Mali, Libya, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. You may imagine why. And they are translated in many languages. But what is a red list? This you see, just a picture. You see here sculptures and reliefs. It's a red list of Libyan cultural objects and reliefs. If something, any kind of properties, cultural properties similar to this one are imported, you have to check. You have to make a due diligence. And thousand objects were identified, sized, and returned thanks to the red list. Just let me quote you the case of the red list for Afghanistan that permitted the United Kingdom custom officer to size and return to Kabul Museum 1,500 imported objects. Now, in a few minutes, because time runs, a few words about how can museums and sites increase the social and economic impact of cultural heritage. How can museums and heritage sites support local development? What is the contribution of museums and heritage sites to attain the United Nations global goals for sustainable development? Well, very, very quickly. I have to quote to you a successful partnership between ICOM and the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's important because, you know, ICOM is a non-governmental cultural association. OECD is an economic government association. Economic, they are economists, but they recognize that cultural heritage is an important asset for local development. So they decided together with ICOM to create this guide, to give best practice, give suggestion, give strategy to local communities and administrators how to maximize the impact of museum and heritage on local development. The guide provides strategic action and self-assessment framework for museum and sites to strengthen the linkage with the local economy, and for local governments to enhance the social and economic value of museums and heritage as part of sustainable local development. Well, it talks about 5 themes, 5 areas of action. First of all, the first theme is the role of museum for economic development. Second issue, the role of museum for urban regeneration and community development. 3, what museum can do for culturally aware and creative societies. 4, the role of museum as places for inclusion, health, and well-being. And then, generally speaking, how can develop strategies to emphasize, to highlight, to improve, to increase the role of museums, the impact of museum on local development. So, very quickly, this guide was tested in more than 20 museum and sites and by various ICOM committees. It was presented in 2018 in a OECD conference, and officially launched in 2019 at the ICOM General Conference in Kyoto. And we don't have time now, just let me tell you a few words about, for example, the first themes, the role of museum for local economic development. Well, in addition to create cultural and educational value, museum contributes to local economic development. And the potential impact of museums are job creation and revenue generation related to visitor economy. Job creation, revenue generation related to the increased territorial attractiveness for tourists, talents, and business, dissemination of technologies, creation of goods and services, support of creativity. Well, for each of these issues, the guide provides best practice, proposals, indicators, and so on. And let's go on. Let me finish saying a few words about the Agenda 2030, the role of museum and culture. You know very well about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You know that they are a great ambitious goals. And of course, putting an end to poverty and deprivations require strategies to improve health and education, reduce inequality, spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and safeguard biosphere integrity. But what I emphasize here, and I finish here, is the role of culture in attaining the UN Sustainable Goals. Culture is pivotal for the Agenda 2030 success. Cultural rights, heritage, diversity, and creativity are crucial components of sustainable development. And let me cite here UNESCO. It says that culture is who we are and what shapes our identity. Culture contributes to poverty reduction and paves the way for a human-centered, inclusive, and equitable development. No development can be sustainable without culture. And again, I have to quote this important United Nations UNESCO 2006 report on culture for sustainable cultural development, urban development. You know, people in 2008, 50% of the population lived in cities. In 2050, well, United Nations says that 2/3 of the population will live in cities. And every week they say that a number of people equal to the population of Boston, of Zurich, move from the countryside to cities. It's a great change. Well, you cannot have sustainable cities without culture. And the recommendation, the three main recommendations were people-centered cities are culture-centered spaces. Quality urban environments are shaped by culture. Sustainable cities need integrated policy making based on culture. And of course, ICOM and museum are very active. We created a working group on that, and we joined the Global Coalition United for Biodiversity, and museums are very active. And I finished remembering, maybe of you remember this sentence, this phrase, this motto: think global, act local. And it was invented by David Brower, in 1971, many years ago. It was the founder of Friends of Earth. And that's what does it mean? It means that sustainable development, peace, and so on. It's important, very important that these are discussed in international summits, international conferences. But then in the end, you create a better world, a sustainable world, a peaceful world, if you act locally. And that's a challenge for each of us personally, for each of our museums, for each of our institutions, for everyone. We have to act locally. We have to act every day, having in mind these great goals, these important goals, and act on the basis of this goal. It's not only something for the leaders, it's something for each of us. And with this sentence, I finish my lecture.
Thank you. Really, thank you for your insightful lecture on museums and world heritage interpretation and presentation. And I really liked that part about social role of museums as hubs of participation, intercultural dialogue, and social inclusion. Really interesting, and I really liked that the importance of museum on achieving the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And well, today our public participants really left lots of questions, so maybe maybe we'd better move on to our Q&A session. And yeah, there's our first question. So I will read it. The question was, cultural heritage is now being interpreted from past to present values.
I don't hear very well.
Oh,
Can
really?
you raise the voice?
Yeah. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, better.
Great. I will read it once again from the start.
No, it's the question. The question,
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, I will read the question. The question is, cultural heritage is now being interpreted from past to present values. This emphasizes the role of social values of cultural heritage and recognizes the importance of the community around it. Although museums have also focused on social values, this is not considered to have changed the interpretation of heritage displayed in museums, but simply the role of the museums itself becomes closer to the public. In that, the museum has a role and function to display heritage with past values. Delivering present values of heritage in museum will be changing. How do you think that museum could exhibit heritage's present values? Yeah, that was the question. Quite a long one, right?
Yeah, good. Well, the social role of museums is not something recent. I want to highlight to you that in 1972, so many years ago, UNESCO and ICOM organized the Round Table of Santiago de Chile, which has become one cornerstone of the history of museology. And this conference was focused on the social role of museums, on democratization of culture, of museum at the service of society. So I want to tell you that it's not something new, but it's, of course, emphasize the role of the collection, the role of the museum, the role of the cultural heritage in, first of all, improving the identity. A community has to have an identity. Without an identity, a new identity, let's say, continuously changing, continuously updating, but must have an identity. And museum, cultural heritage sites have an important role, an indispensable role to show, to educate to this identity, because we are son of our predecessor. You cannot understand the present without having the memory of what was the past. And we cannot plan the future without knowing our past. So that's the main point in an exhibition, in all the very incredible number of activities that museums do, which of course are related to the collection, to the exhibition, but also to many other ways of improving the intercultural dialogue in our communities. Help to build up new identities, help to open the mind. Social role means help communities open the mind. We have a past, but we will have a future only if we open the mind, if we are open to change. We cannot only think that everything will be always the same. No, museums show that everything changes. And we accept change, we have to manage change, we have to create change, and we have to be creative, open mind. And that, for me, That's the main value of the museum and cultural heritage. Permit communities to recognize themselves as community, and at the same time open the communities to the world. That's because, first of all, cultural heritage is universal. It's part of a community, but it's part of the universal value that we are all in the same planet. We are friends. We are all brother and sister. We have to be together peacefully. And we can build up a peaceful world only if you respect diversity. So first of all, the museum and cultural heritage site should highlight the diversity of their communities. Why? Because they have to recognize the diversity of other communities. This is the way to a better future, and to avoid the past mistakes that we keep on, unfortunately, doing.
Thank you for your answer, and I also agree with your idea that museums should express and show the diversity of our culture, of all the cultures and all the communities, and it is really precious for all the people all over the world. And well, I will give you.
I don't hear you. Maybe I have to excuse me. Maybe I have to skip the screen sharing because I cannot hear you.
Oh, if you stop that one, then you may have some broadcasting errors. So we will just check our audio system. Well, can you hear me now clearly? Is it okay?
Maybe now I can I hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Is it better?
Not very well. I don't know why.
Not really well.
Okay. Let's try. Let's try.
Our technical team is checking our audio
it's very
system.
low, very low. The volume is very low. Strange. Before it was very clear.
Is it much better?
Now it's fine.
Oh, much better. Great. Oh.
Now, okay. Now, good. Now it's perfect.
Great.
Okay.
Great.
Now it's perfect.
Well, then let's move on to our second question. Will it be okay to move on to our second question? Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Great.
Absolutely.
I will read the second question here. The second question was, I remember there will be change of the definition of a museum. How do you expect the keywords to change compared to the museum definition determined in 2007? Yeah, I think that was the follow-up question of the first one, maybe?
Yes, you're right. We are going to update the definition. It's a process. We wanted to decide something in Kyoto, but it was not possible. Got different ideas, and I think the procedure has to be improved. The process is going on. Now we are just in a phase of collecting keywords, key concepts from all our national, international committees. We established a working group called ICOM Define. Is working very well, and is collecting all these keywords. Personally, I think that the keywords of the 2007 definition are still perfectly important, and they will be recognized. But of course, I think that there will be new keywords to introduce, so that you can update the definition. But so far, I cannot tell you. At the end of the process, we have decided that we are going to have a decision in Prague. That means we will have a triennial conference in Prague, and in 2020, in the end of August of 2022, and next year, and then we will approve the new definition. if you are a member of ICOM, you can consult all the documents that are produced. In the next month, there will be produced all these keywords and key concepts that have to enrich the definition. And but now I cannot tell you.
Great, got it. Well, thank you for your answer. And here I will read our third question. The question was, the museum has been elite-centered so far, but more and more citizens are participating in curating process. This process can lead to problems such as undermining important narratives or diversifying the truth. Then what kind of device is there for this? Yep, that was the question.
Well, I think that it's not a question of find a new device, but it's a question to change the mind, to change the cultural approach. Of course, participation is one of the main, that we were talking about keywords in the museum definition. Participation will certainly be one of these, I guess, because participation is, it's fundamental, but it's not, we have a large idea of participation of the community. It's not only that museum have to listen to what the community says. It's something more. Is that the museum have to go in the communities, have to share the decision with the community. That's the main important. Being a participatory museums, just to quote an important book about the participation, means that museums are more and more part of the discussion of the community, and the decision of the museum are shared with the communities. That's the main point. There is not a technical solution, but it's a profound ethical and cultural approach. Then, of course, we may think that the technological innovation, the internet, the digital revolution can help us to increase this interaction with the communities and the role of museum. But in the end, it means increase, change the cultural approach. We are part of the communities. We are not, maybe we have never been, but however, I don't know. Certainly, we are not a closed community in the ivory tower looking at the world. No. We are part of the communities. We discuss with them. And all the issues, the museum are there to be places where the crucial issues of the museum can be discussed, can be debated freely. Because we are free, we can freely debate on any issue. And really, because we are free, we are ethically committed, we can accept any ideas. We can discuss it, and we try to help the communities. In 2017, we had the theme of the ICOM Museum Day was museum and the unspeakable, and not recognized history. That's the main point. We have to deal sometimes with narratives, with episodes, with histories, with experience of the past that sometimes, because they are too sorrowful, because they are too emotional, communities have difficulties to deal with. But museums here are there for that, to help communities to face all the problems, to discuss it freely, and to give, let's say, a cultural framework, an historical framework. So, understanding history, we can also change ourselves.
Great, thank you for your answer. And maybe we can move on to our next question. And now here's our next question. Next question was, as a communication bridge between heritage and the public, what would be the best way for communication for museums to deliver heritage interpretation?
I think that that is what museums do every day. It's already here. I mean, the collection of the museum are part of the cultural heritage, usually of or the historical cities or the territory around them. I know there are some museums called universal museums, so they have a collection from coming from for many reasons. I talk about it a little bit. Collection coming from communities very far from them, but the main part of the most part of the museum in the world are, what do they conserve? Cultural heritage of their cities, of their territory, of their communities. So what they do, they interpret their collection, their heritage. But the main point is that they cannot deal only with the collection they have inside the museum, but they go outside. They have to connect. First of all, it's a question of relation, cultural relation, philosophical relation, historical relation between what is inside, what the resources, the knowledge resources in the collection inside the museum, and what is outside the museum. So interpret the heritage means develop narratives, develop history, make connection between what is the community today, what was the community centuries ago, thousands of years ago, and then showing how this development and how the heritage show the development of our communities is the key, the real key. Behind each object, behind each heritage, there is history of people, history of person. We have to enhance the people who produce the reality of today. Sometimes our communities forget about their past, but everything is produced by people, and history is done every day. And this is, and the future is built up today. And this is the role of museums, the knowledge. And then there is technical assets, the digital information, the better interaction, more modern way of talking, new languages. That's the most important things. We know that we don't have a public. We have many different publics. And it's not that the public must understand museum. Museum must understand that there are different publics, there are different people, different communities, and we have to connect with them. It's a matter of communication. Communication is bilateral. It's not from museums to communities, but it's from communities to museums. And hence, delivery and heritage interpretation mean to connect, put people in relations, and emphasize different, again, diversity, different histories put together, and try to explain it in the best way. Even is going to a museum, going to a heritage sites must be a pleasure, a great pleasure for me. It should be a pleasure for everybody, because it means to connect with culture, to connect with what happens around yourself, to understand better what happens around yourself.
Great. Thank you for your answer. And I think this is our last question today. And I think this question is for the president of ICOM, not for the lecturer of today's lecture. But I will read out this question. The question was, how independent is ICOM from government influence? Can ICOM work with government? Or if there is a conflict, how are ICOM causes and members protected?
Oh, that's a very important compliment to all the people who made question. This is very important. I mean, ICOM is an autonomous association. That's absolutely. We live on the fees of our members. We are not governmental, absolutely. We are totally autonomous. Our budget is made up by the fees of our members. That's all. What does it mean? It means that we try to interpret, reflect the opinions of our members, but what is most important, the needs of the museums, of the cultural institution, of the heritage. So this, our opinion are taken to the governments, really, and of course, we work with governments. Of course, we work with communities and we work with government. Absolutely, absolutely. Why? Because governments are expression of the communities, first of all. Second, they are decision makers. So we want to help museums to have a better role in society. We have to interact. We have to convince them that museums are important. And the same with communities. We cannot take for granted that community thinks that museums are very important. No, we have to demonstrate every day that museums are important, that cultural institutions are important, that generally speaking, cultural heritage, the preservation of cultural heritage is important. We have to demonstrate it by facts to the communities and to the governments as well. So, while I speak every week, I participate to some institutional table, talking on behalf of museum and cultural heritage, trying to convince decision makers that it's important. We cannot recover from pandemics without cultural institutions. You may imagine that we can recover from pandemics only with shops open and supermarkets open and with museum, theater, and so on closed. No, it's impossible. It's impossible. But we have to convince decision makers. So we are autonomous, but we work with government and we try to help them to take the good decision. And that's our position. Then, to tell you the truth, the relation in each nations, the relations with the government are dealt with by the national committees, so are different. We may have governments who listen to ICOM and to museums, governments that listen a little bit less. There are governments who sign agreements or say something in international meetings and then the facts doesn't follow words. That's life. We try to improve the role. And of course, at the international, I myself, as international president, I work with international bodies, of course, G20, G7, OECD, UNESCO, United Nations, and so on. When I was the president of ICOM Italy, I met constantly with the ministers and so on. That's part of the life of ICOM. But again, we are autonomous. We are autonomous. We doesn't depend by government's decision.
Great. Thank you for your answer. And well, really, once again, I genuinely appreciate for your insightful lecture. And I hope we can make World Heritage interpretation and presentation into a more inclusive and open to all, including all the communities and all the different cultures, diverse cultures, with the help of museums, as museums and World Heritage sites have a strong interaction and interconnection between each other. So really appreciate for your insightful lecture today, President Alberto Galandini. Great. And before we end today's lecture, I will give a brief introduction to our next lecture.
Can I say?
Oh,
sorry. Yeah. Can I say just thank you to all the friends who listened to my lecture. It was a great pleasure for me, and see you soon.
Great, thank you. And I will give a brief intro to our next lecture, which will be held in June. The third lecture, World Heritage and Tourism, Looking for Synergies, will be held on 17 June. The lecturer for the third lecture is Maria Gregory Burbis, the director of the UNESCO Chair of Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne University. It will be held at 10 a.m. CT and 5 p.m. KST, which is the same time with today's today's lecture's starting time. Please check the Facebook page and Instagram of the Preparatory Office for further information on the online lecture series. Well, thanks again for joining us today, and I hope to see you all on the third lecture. Thank you. Ciao!